Good afternoon. I'm glad you can spend some time this weekend to devote towards worship. We do have one significant announcement to make. As you probably know, as of July 1, I will be serving the Shelbina and the Monroe City United Methodist churches. Those two churches currently worship at 10 a.m., both of them. And so to make this work, both churches will be moving their worship times. We did a survey, gathered the information upon what each church congregation preferred. The boards met this last Wednesday, and we made a decision. It was a very easy decision based upon the data gathered from the two churches. Monroe City had a very clear preference for 9 a.m., an overwhelming preference for 9 a.m., and Shelbina had an overwhelming preference for not having a preference. The data for Monroe City was one very clear spike, and the data for Shelbina was that some people wanted early, some people wanted late. They're pretty flexible. So what we're going to do is 9 a.m. at Monroe City, 10:30 at Shelbina, effective July 1. I'll be at Monroe City well before worship, an hour before worship, to make sure I can chat with anyone there, and I will be at Shelbina after worship to chat with anyone after worship. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. I'll either have an answer or I'll be thankful for having someone point out a question that I obviously need to figure out. A few years ago, I went for a drive, Milan, Trenton, Brookfield, back home, a few stops along the way, had some people I needed to see, and I got home, went to get out of my car, and my back started spasming, and it was bad. I went to get out of the car, and I just could barely do it. Got inside. This was a couple years ago. Children are younger, and so when they run up to me and they'd want to be picked up, I'd have to realize I can't pick them up. This is a problem. And so for the next couple of days, I tried to tough it out. I would sit in a chair, sitting very straight, in a very straight back chair, and try not to move. And if I drove, I had to be very careful about sitting up, and it was. After a few days of this, it became clear that it was just getting worse and worse, that the muscles in my back were getting tenser and more locked in, and something had to change. And so I called a lady named Sharon, who does deep tissue massage. She lives over by Milan, and so I went out to her place, swallowed my pride, went out there, had never done something like this before, but okay, here, I'll try it. So I went out there, laid down, and I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know what to expect. Well, I know what I expected. What I expected was, you call something deep tissue massage, and I expect her to push, because that's deep, right? Deep and push are the same thing, as I'm thinking as I'm walking into this. She's going to push hard, and that's going to take care of things. And that's not what happened. I can't speak for any other situation, but I can tell you what happened that day. What happened that day is she used the same amount of gentle pressure working her way up my back, and she would be paying attention to the places where there was no reaction. Okay, and she'd move on to the next muscle or set of muscles, and she would use that same pressure, and I would like squirm or jerk, and I'd stop, and she would go back to that same spot and use that same gentle pressure, and I'd squirm a little bit more, and eventually that muscle group would let go. And then she would move on to the next muscle group, which would either be okay, or I would squirm again because it would hurt. And at this whole time, I'm thinking I want to ask about what's happening. I want to ask about the theory of how this works. And I'm glad that I resisted this inclination and just sat there, just sort of thinking through what was happening. And I had plenty of time to think, because I was there for an hour. It took that long before I was able to then get up and walk out the door and sit down in my truck without worrying about my back. What I had assumed, I realized as I went in, is that deep would be about push. That to be a deep tissue massage would be something where someone would push really hard. And I was wrong. It was not about deep tissue massage being about pushing hard. Deep tissue massage was about paying attention to what's happening at a deeper level. And so wherever she used that same gentle touch, at the places it was, my back was in decent shape, it was fine, right? And the places where things were messed up, That was as much as I could take. But over time, that brought healing, and my back started to relax. So it was not about deep push, it was about paying deep attention. I had an experience of this in a different sort of sense a few years later. I was working with a group of teenagers at a church camp over at Joda, and we're sitting in a circle. It was like 3 days in to a week church camp, and we were playing this game, Two Truths and a Lie, and everyone would tell 3 things about themselves. 2 of them would be true, 1 would be a lie. And so I would say something like, I'm a captain of sailing boats, I plan to have 16 children, I'm an Eagle Scout. And you say, obviously you don't plan to have 16 children, or something like that would be kind of how it's played. And so we'd been there, this is our 3rd day, we've had sort of icebreakers, which are not exactly my favorite activity, I must confess, but we've had our icebreakers, and like, this was the last game like this that we'd play, and on Wednesday. And people by now had been chatting with each other, so they were trying to be sneaky with their 2 truths and a lie. And we'd gone about halfway around the circle, and it's fun, it's working well. And we got to the next person. It was someone who hadn't said much the whole week. And it's not like they weren't involved, they just hadn't been all that talkative, and had spent more time watching. And it gets to that person, and they say their 3 things. And I admit the first 2, I completely have forgotten. I don't know what they were, because the 3rd thing this person said just took my breath away. The person said, I would give anything to see my grandma again. And someone guessed the lie, and it was one of the other 2 things they'd said, and the game kept on going. And got done, and everyone was looking at me for what's next, and I turned to the person who had said this, and I just asked him, could you tell us about your grandma? Could you tell us about your grandma? And then we listened about this wonderful woman who had been much loved by her family and was intensely missed, and this grandmother had died about a year before, and we heard someone talk about their grief, like they really missed this person, and the grief was really raw. And they were wondering whether it would ever get better. And here I am, I'm supposed to be the one leading the group and sort of knowing what to say. And I didn't know what to say, but then other teens, other people in this person's group sort of chimed in, like, this is how I've experienced grief. This is how I've experienced it. This is when my parent or my uncle or my brother died. And they started sharing these stories. That wasn't in the plan for the day. Like, it was just flat not there, right? We had not planned to have that conversation about grief and family, but because we were there spending time together and our lives were touching, when something deep stirred, I'm thankful that we noticed it. It taught me a lot about listening and about paying attention, right? Because I was thinking about that. It wasn't that experience of deep that came to pass that day. It wasn't because I was pushing hard for you to talk. It's not like I got in front of the group and said, I want to push really hard so we can talk about the things that matter the most. It was, let's do this thing together. And it wasn't about deep push. It was about paying attention to when deep things happened. And this person said something deep. I would do anything to see my grandmother again. That changed that person's life. I mean, I talked to this person later, and that was the first time they talked about it since their grandmother had died. And big deal for them. Lives that touch, people that spend time together consistently, when we have that with others, we have an opportunity to pay attention to when things happen that are deep. Not that we go pushing for deep things, but deep things do happen. We're not trying to elicit that response, but just being with others, we can trust that when the time comes up, when something deep stirs, if we're paying attention, that we can notice, and that it's really worth noticing. And that's how I understand evangelism. Evangelism is the Greek word for good news, the practice of sharing and spreading good news. And good news for that camper years ago was that when they dared to say, I would do anything to see my grandma again, that others could hear that and they could say something of their own story. You know, this is where I found a way to think about my grief. Here's what I'm looking forward to when I'm going to see my grandmother again. And we start talking about the nature of like heaven and how do we think about this, right? So when something deep stirs, for whatever reason it is, to be ready to notice that and then to maybe share a few words that matter, that's hard. Here's what I'll do to help. We don't say, let me know if you need any help. We say, let me drop off a lasagna, and can I please, right? Can I check it? It's not tell me if you need something. It's I'll check in with you in a week. Will that be okay, right? We can say something and be good news in a practical way to a person when something deep shows up, right? That I really miss my aunt. I come to communion because I miss my aunt. I had started writing this originally, like a while ago, as something to share, maybe an email, start sharing with the congregations I serve, because we look towards the future and we're worried, like, where is our future? Where's our future? Where are going to be the people that will fill the pews going forward? And there's this sense that if we're going to grapple with the future, it's going to be hard, and we're going to have to push hard to be able to figure out new things. We got to do new things. There are going to be hard things to be able to figure out what we're going to do next. And I know that's my tendency, like to do new things, and there's going to be a challenge. We have to push through them, and if we just apply ourselves, it's a very Midwestern response, I have a feeling. But I don't think that really is helpful when it comes to reaching folks, paying attention to folks. We think of what is hard, and we think of we're trying to get a whole attention of people, and we try to push hard, and the response when someone tries to push hard is others just kind of pull away. You ever hear the term Bible thumping? The idea of like you just go up and you hit someone with the Bible, and they're going to come to church. Like you guilt them into it or tell them they have to do it, and then like that's going to be hard. We're going to have to push hard to make that happen. I don't buy it. I just simply don't buy it. I don't think we can do it and make it be good news. I don't think it works. I think that when it comes to reaching people, I think it's about being consistent and intentional and paying attention to when deep things happen. It's not that we push hard because that's how you get to people. It's that we pay attention and we are consistently involved with other people's lives, with the lives of people that we care about. And then we're ready when something deep stirs and be able to have a word of good news that, the way I got through this is I lean on my church family and I'll pick you up and I'll take you and we'll go. Or, that's hard because you lost a friend, like, I'll pick you up, come with me and let's go to this Bible study together, or let's go to the fish fry, or let's go to the meal the church is going to have, and let me introduce you to some friends that have helped me through. Like, just to notice when something happens and to be able to have a response. Even if that response is, I'm struggling with that too, or I'm confused by that too. But that intentional, consistent paying attention to other people in their lives. And I think this lines up with what we see in the Gospels. Right? If we look at what Jesus does, Jesus doesn't go up to the men who would be his disciples and say, I want you to do A, B, C, D, E, and give them a whole list of all the things they're going to do. What he says is, he goes up to them and he says, follow me. It's an invitation. Come along. Right? It's not hard. It's not demanding. It's just follow me. Right? And you're going to find something. Follow me. Right? Not pushing. All right, and then when Jesus tells the disciples what they're going to do, he calls them fishers of men, fishers of people. And think about the nature of fishing. When you go fishing, do you spend the entire time like pushing and wrangling and shoving? No. When you go fishing, there's a lot of downtime where you're just with people. And yes, there is a time where you're pulling in the net or you're reeling in the rod, but like a lot of times you're just with people and you end up just talking, right? And I think that's fitting. We're to be fishers of people, but that doesn't mean we're out there wrangling them all the time. Sometimes we're just sitting with them, being with them, enjoying life together. It's kind of a low-key thing. No Bible thumping, no haranguing, no asking people within the first minutes of meeting them whether they know Jesus or not, and having a 1-minute summation of that will lead them to an altar call and say this short prayer. Like, I don't buy it. That's not what I see Jesus doing, and I don't see it working in people's lives today. Jesus invites people to follow him, and he sends people out to fish, to be patient, and if you cast something and you don't pull in a fish, you just cast again. There's always more fish, right? If you look at Paul, like how did Paul start churches? The way Paul started churches is he would go to a community and he would go to the synagogue and he'd hang out with people there and he'd chat about his way of understanding scriptures. And he was a tent maker. He would go and he'd work with people. And you know what he spent most of the time doing? He spent most of that time making tents. Right? He wasn't out there wrangling people and arguing them into the church. He was out there living his life with them. And when deep stirred and people asked, he could respond. What brings you to town? Well, let me tell you about Jesus. That's why I'm here. Or someone could say, my loved one died. Well, let me tell you about this, what my thought is on that. Or how do we understand Rome? How do we understand, all the things that were going on at the time. One of the cardinal rules of preaching is don't be the hero of the sermon. And I admit that in telling the sermon today, sharing this, I have broken that rule because that one time I got it right and a person brought up something deep and I noticed it and it mattered and I'm deeply thankful that I did. I'm also aware that there are many times I've probably missed such moments. And when we are doing something as low-key as two truths and a lie, and someone said something of importance that mattered, and I just whiffed. And so what I wonder is how many more such moments would there be if I was also more intentional about living a life that touched others on a more consistent basis. Not doing things that were hard because we need to push hard, but because we do things together, and in doing things together with people, things happen, things come up. And so we're here at the beginning of the summer, and I think we can safely say, hopefully, that we're kind of past all the COVID stuff, and we can meet outside, and as we all know, it's a lot you can do things outside with just about anyone. You invite someone over to your home, that's a little bit intimidating at times, but you can go for a walk, you can have a picnic, go to a community event, go to there's a bunch of things you can do. There are community events that are going to start happening here in Bethel and Shelbyville and Hannibal. There's always something going on. And I'm going to invite you to consider intentionally spending time with people this summer that you might not have spent time with before. It could be people that are in the pews around you that you just don't know as well as you might. That would be wonderful. Get to know some people at the church that you're at and just go pay some attention to them. Not to do deep things, but just to spend time knowing that something deep may come up, it may not, but what matters is to be together. And then maybe it's time to go out and intentionally spend some time with people outside of this church. Right? And if you don't know people outside this church, maybe it's time to get involved in things that are out there, because there are plenty of things that are out there. Right? I'm on PTO up at the elementary school, and that's how I've gotten to know some great people over there, is because I got involved, and so I'm meeting people that I've never met before, and it has been a very good thing. If the only people you know are people who are in a church, it's time to go meet some new people and pay attention to them and see what happens next. It is my job as a pastor, and it's the job of the church to create events and opportunities that you can invite people to. It is the responsibility of the people in the pews to be out in the community, spending time with people, not pushing hard and trying to Bible thump people into church, but to be spending time with people and offering good news of being with each other And then, when it is appropriate and fitting and a gift, be able to invite them to something the church does. That's how we're good news to our community. I believe that's how we find our way forward. That's our future. It's not in shoving, it's in paying attention to what is already happening in people's lives and saying, we got some good news for you. Come join us. It'll be worth it. Amen.